So all morning my phone was lighting up with cancellations, so thank you guys for coming. How exciting to bring poetry to Palisade, yay! I also want to thank Elise for allowing us to do this here at the library and disrupt her entire afternoon. I'm Wendy Videlock. I'm a writer and artist living right here in Palisade up in Sobre El Rio. And I'm delighted to be the one to introduce our talented and varied cast of characters to you today. So many of you are familiar with our musical guest, the much beloved, multi-talented John Anglim. John is a creative force, a visual artist, photographer, writer, radio personality, and of course a talented musician. Adding a touch of the mystical to our presentation, we have Palisade's own Dulce Bell-Bulley. Dulce is a Jungian psychotherapist and is currently working on a series of novels. She's also in transition. Owner of Fruita's Lithic Bookstore and Gallery. Poet, geologist, astronomer, hanger of stones, builder of things large, an all-around hungry student of the world, Danny Rosen. From Telluride, we have award-winning poet Kierstin Bridger, author of Demi-Monde, a book of poems which explores the half-world of the prostitutes and saloon girls of frontier Telluride and other small western towns. Our other guest that was going to be here today, George Sibley, had to cancel. He had a cold. It was so sad to do that. We were really sad too, but Danny's filling in. Our special guest, narrator, and writer of the piece we'll be presenting today was the first famous poet I ever met. Now, famous is relative in the world of poetry, but famous to us means that we've read the person.
Famous to your relative.
So I had read his work before I met him and before I moved to Colorado some 25 years ago. At my first reading with Dave in Basalt, he said to a group of students, "Poetry is fundamentally fun, and if we're not having fun, we're doing something wrong." And I have quoted him many, many times on that. We've since become dear friends with he and his wife, Chrissy. He's a man whose devotion to language and to the art of poetry is equal only to his devotion to history, experience, humanity, humility, travel, place, and of course, love. To have a conversation with Dave on any of these subjects is always entertaining and always illuminating. His books, essays, verse novels, and librettos are grounded in the earth and fueled by the imagination. He's traveled much of the world, has lived in Greece, Alaska, Washington State, and he's off to Tasmania very soon, sooner than we thought.
Sooner than we thought, yeah.
Chased by a virus.
Chased by a virus. So school closed down and said, "We're going remote." And you said, "I can be remote."
I'm going really remote.
Just a quick note, we are not allowed to sell books here at the library. However, we'll be loitering around outside afterwards. And we were going to have...
Like high school drug
Right.
dealers.
You want a book? I got a book for it. It's really good stuff. We were going to have dinner next door, but they're closed today, so we're going to have to find somewhere else to eat. But we'll be loitering if you're looking for books. So Dave has done all this traveling. However, in his own words, he tells us, "Drawn as I was to famous centers of the arts, I was always happy to be hoofing it alone, all conversations internal, or made with any kindly stranger who gave me a lift. Even the attractions of a city like Madrid couldn't hold me for long. I felt compelled to the margins and spent a month in Almeria on the Costa Blanca, falling into a regular life of reading in cafes and bothering my neighbors with late night hammering on my portable typewriter." He goes on to say, "What we often call a cultural life, including all the boozy rebellion of the arts, was something I could only take in small doses. The greatest museums in the world made me feel claustrophobic after a while, and I hated competing with crowds, even to see a masterpiece. I was a Westerner, an American far Westerner, that is, and from a small town, and crowds were alien to me. One moment I could enjoy their anonymity, the next I was fighting for air. In a forest I felt at home, but starved for the sort of intensity art promises. In museums I felt alien, my culture thirst slaked, my soul pummeled and quaking. I was born divided, perhaps not so uncommon a fate. Poetry is for me an attempt to find unity in being. As such, it is a meditative process made public through stories and forms. Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Mason.
Welcome, one and all. I'm so glad to be back in Palisade. Welcome spring, whether or not it feels like spring. Welcome renewal, whether or not it feels like renewal. Welcome fellow humans, residents of this beautiful town near the Book Cliffs, which I have always wanted to read. This meeting place of rivers and stories. Here we are, and this is a celebration of poetry and theater. Both of those are Greek words. One means making, and the other means view or vision or spectacle. Let's come together for a little while and see what we can see, hear what we can hear. Whether we know it or not, we live in a land of poetry. Poetry has lived here as long as people have. So it's fitting now to pay tribute to the Ute people who have called this land their home. It's fitting to remember the stories of the thunderbirds and the serpent who ate their young, and how Grand Mesa has been called the land of departed spirits. I pay my respects to the people who have made these stories and to their elders, past, present, and future. And I offer this sonnet by a wonderful Native American poet, Janice Gould, who lived beautifully among us in Colorado and died in beauty last summer.
She is just this side of wonderful, and suddenly the glamorous world fills itself with shining, and we laugh at the highway monuments that explain how hard the trek had been for the Franciscans in the Indian wilderness. Poor fellows. Conversion is the devil's own work. Then the stones of her dream turn up under her feet, the back of a huge land turtle. I know we must be circling paradise, because the ants, as they enter the fleshy petals of the roadside flowers with evident joy and purpose. Oh, my dark, pretty one.
The sonnet is a lovely thing. It means a little song. It came from the Italians into the English tradition and into America. There's a fine sonnet painted inside the rotunda of Colorado's state capitol. Did you know that? It's by a former poet laureate of the state, Thomas Hornsby Ferril. And this is how it goes.
Here is a land where life is written in water. The West is where the water was and is. Father and son of old mother and daughter, following rivers up immensities of range and desert, thirsting the sundown, ever crossing a hill to climb a hill still drier, naming tonight a city by some river, a different name from last night's camping fire. Look to the green within the mountain cup. Look to the prairie parched for water lack. Look to the sun that pulls the oceans up. Look to the clouds that give the oceans back. Look to your heart, and may your wisdom grow to power of lightning and to peace of snow.
That's in the capital of Colorado. I encourage you all to go see it. It's a lovely thing, that poem. Guess what? It's a Shakespearean sonnet. Its form is one that the English poets invented to make rhyming easier. 3 quatrains and a couplet. Shakespeare himself wrote 154 of them. Here is number 33, which you might find fitting under the Colorado mountains.
Full many a glorious morning have I seen, flatter the mountain tops with sovereign eye, kissing with golden face the meadows green, gilding pale streams with heavenly alchemy. Anon, permit the basest clouds to ride with ugly wrack on his celestial face, and from the forlorn world his visage hide, stealing unseen to west with this disgrace. Even so, my sun one early morn did shine, with all triumphant splendor on my brow. But out, alack, he was but 1 hour mine. The raging cloud hath masked him from me now. Yet him, for this my love no whit disdaineth. Sons of the world may stain when heaven's sun staineth.
I actually have no idea what the last line of that poem means. I've been puzzling it over for some time. You have to think about it. And that's the thing about poetry. It can slow us down and make us think. It can make the language hang in the air after we've heard it. So we go looking for those words again, asking what they mean. We think of the West as a hard place, a dry place. Yet it's the West that has given America some of its most enduring poetry. The first state to name a poet laureate was California. The second was Colorado. All those towns in the mountains and deserts with their opera houses, their miners and lumberjacks and ranchers hungry for culture, for anything that might bloom in the desert, like a poem. When I was named Poet Laureate of this state, then Governor Bill Ritter quoted from memory some lines of a poem. It's called Magenta, again by Thomas Hornsby Ferril. I find it one of the most beautiful evocations of the West. The mountain towns, some falling into ruin, and the life of the imagination. It's a long poem, so I've trimmed it down for you here. We'll have 2 people reading it, 2 voices.
Once, up in Gilpin County, Colorado, when a long blue afternoon was standing on end like a tombstone sinking into the Rocky Mountains, I found myself in a town where no one was, and I noticed an empty woman lying unburied on a pile of mining machinery over a graveyard. She was a dressmaker's dummy called Magenta. I named her that because all of a sudden the peaks turned pink and lavender and purple, and all the falling houses in the town began to smell of rats and pennyroyal. The dressmaker's dummy was meant to be like a woman. There was no head. The breast and belly were a cool enamel simulating life. The hips and thighs were made adjustable, encircling and equidistant from a point within, through which, apparently, the woman had been screwed to a pedestal, but the threads were cut and the pedestal was broken.
The poet here begins a conversation with this imaginary woman in the mountains.
Mornings were crystal yellow, too hard to see through. The realness didn't begin till afternoon. We both are real, but we wouldn't have been this morning. Before the blue came up, it was always so. Nothing real ever happened in the morning. The men were always digging for gold in the morning. They were dreaming deep in the earth. You never saw them, but afternoons, they'd come up to bury their wives. These women wanted me to be their friend. I spent my mornings with them, making believe. They'd sit around me, talking about far-off brides, of things beyond the mountains and the mines. Then they would get down on their knees to me, praying with pins and basting for my sanction. Then they would look into mirrors and come back. They'd look out of the windows and come back. They'd walk to the kitchen and come back. They'd scratch the curtains with their fingernails, as if they were trying to scratch the mountains down. I wasn't what they wanted, yet I was. Mornings were never real, but usually by noon, the women died, and the men came up from the bottom of the earth to bury them.
Those must have been strange days, I said, and I tossed a cog from a stamp mill into a yawning shaft. We listened as it clicked the sides of the mine, and we thought we heard it splash, and Magenta said,
Each woman had 7 children, of whom 2 were living, and the 2 would go to church. Sometimes the children went to the opera house to see the tragedies. They can still remember the acrobats and the buglers between the acts. Maybe you never saw a miner dig a grave for a woman he brought across the plains to die at noon when she was sewing a dress, to make a mirror say she was somebody else.
I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, it's getting dark at approximately the rate of 186 spruces per second. And Magenta smiled and said,
Oh, so it is. Up here, the men outnumbered the women, but there were always too many women to go around. I should have liked to know the women who did not need me.
So should I said. Are they buried here?
I think there were hardly any. They came like far-off brides. They would appear each afternoon when the funerals were over. Some disappeared, some changed into curious songs, and some of them slowly changed into beautiful mountains.
She pointed to a peak with snowy breast, still tipped with fire, and said,
The miners named that mountain Silver Heels, after a girl who was never seen until along toward evening.
This is an odd coincidence, I said, because I've been using that mountain for your head.
So the imagination lives and poetry blooms everywhere. Another Colorado poet, Belle Turnbull, who lived and taught in Colorado Springs and finished her days in Breckenridge, had this to say in words about a place.
The tail of your eye, your nostrils know the ombre of what was here. You know a stand of timber, stout, having purple cones, ambered with resin, that roared along this chimney, and you know the smell of gold in a hole, perverse and somber. 5 hewn logs bedded in moss and mallow, a pride of spruces in an unroofed still house, under a 3-faced peak, a name on granite, a scrap or 2 from the junk of a man's head, and into the tail of your eye comes up the shadow, but the words have not come up. They have not found you. For a town blanched at the head of a high valley, for what was first out of turf returning, out of the springs, out of strong rock, never the words, only the air thinned round you.
A mountain people living among mountains. We know that glimmer, that magic of thin air. And we know the silence, the isolation, the desire for connection. Imagine the delight of mountain people seeing and hearing for the first time a sonnet hidden in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle fine is this: my lips 2 blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss.
Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much. Which mannerly devotion shows them this? For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch. and palm to palm in holy palmer's kiss.
Have not saints lips and holy palmers too?
Aye, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer.
Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair.
Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake.
And move not, while my prayer's effect I take. Is the play a mirror? Is it a window? We can have recognitions and the shock of recognition. Each poem, too, is a stage, and the bard's many sonnets are little dramas of love, hate, disgust, joy, rage, and beauty. If you want to, I'll read back to you.
Shall I compare you to a summer's day?
Of course.
Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's leaf hath too short a date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often in his golden complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines. By chance or nature's changing course untrimmed, but thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou oathst, nor shall death brag thou wandered in his shade, when eternal lines to time thou growst, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this and gives life to thee.
As an imperfect actor on the stage, who with his fear is put beside his part, or some fierce thing replete with too much rage, or whose strength's abundance weakens his own heart, so I, for fear of trust, forget to say the perfect ceremony of love's rite, and in mine own love's strength seem to decay, o'ercharged with burden of my own love's might. Oh, let my books be then the eloquence and dumb presagers of my speaking breast, who plead for love and look for recompense, more than tongue that hath more expressed. Oh, learn to read what silent love hath writ, to hear with eyes belongs to love's folly wit.
What is your substance? Where are of you made, that millions of strange shadows on you tend? Since everyone hath, everyone, one shade, and you but one can every shadow lend. Describe Adonis, and the counterfeit is poorly imitated after you. On Helen's cheek all art of beauty set, and you, in Grecian, tires are painted new, speaking of the spring and foison of the year, and one doth shadow of your beauty show, the other as your bounty doth appear, and you, in every blessed shape we know, in all external grace, you have some part, but you like none you, for constant heart.
My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked red and white, but to no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes there is more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant, I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare.
So many colors, so many facets of love. Is this a mirror or a window? Who are we, really? And what is this mystery we call a life?
Tired with all these, for restful death I cry. As to behold desert a beggar born, as needy, nothing trimmed in duality, and purest faith unhappily forsworn, and gilded honor shamefully misplaced, and maiden virtue rudely strumpeted, and right perfection wrongly disgraced, and strength by limping sway disabled, and art made tongue-tied by authority, and folly doctor-like controlling skill, and simple truth miscalled simplicity, and captive good attending captain ill. Tired with all these, from these I would be gone, save that to die I would leave my love alone.
In the old age, black was not counted fair, or if it were, it bore not beauty's name. But now is black beauty's successive heir, and beauty slandered with a bastard shame. For since each hand put on nature's power, fearing the foul with art's false borrowed face, sweet beauty hath no name, no holy bower, but is profaned, if not lives in disgrace. Therefore my mistress's brows are raven black, her eyes so suited, and their mourners seem at such who not born fair, no beauty lack, slandering creation with a false esteem, yet so they mourn, becoming of their woe, that every tongue says beauty should look so.
These wonderful poems did not come out of nowhere, but from a world of hurt and beauty, danger and indifference, just like ours. I think of love and politics in Shakespeare's time and ours. They that have the power to hurt and will do none, that do not do the thing they most do show, who moving others are themselves a stone, unmoved, cold, into temptation slow. They rightly do inherit heaven's graces, and husband nature's riches from expense. They are the lords and owners of their faces, others but stewards of their excellence. The summer's flower is to the summer sweet, though to itself it only live and die. But if that flower with base infection mate, the basest weed outbraves his dignity. For sweetest things turn sourest by their deeds. Lilies that fester smell far worse than weeds. I think of love, always of love.
Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me prove it, I never writ, nor no man ever loved.
And I think of spring.
From you I have been absent in the spring, when proud-pied April, dressed in all his trim, hath put a spirit of youth in everything. That heavy Saturn laughed and leaped with him, yet nor the lays of birds, nor the sweet smell of different flowers in odor and in hue, could make me any summer story tell, or from their proud lap pluck them where they grew. Nor did I wonder at the lily's white, nor praise the deep vermilion of the rose, They were but sweet, but figures of delight, dawn, drawn after you, pattern of all of those. Yet it seemed it winter still, and you away, as with your shadow, I with these did play.
Spring in Colorado can be a sudden emergence from the snow. I know an Australian poet who lived here for a while in a cabin in Manitou Springs and learned the subtle wakings of this land. The poet is my wife, Chrissy, whose pen name is Callie Cronin Davies. It's typical of her to have learned another name for a cicada, which she uses in her sonnet, Wingbanger. I have heard a cicada crawled out of the dark silences of the mountain after years, eating its heart out, to join its luck, its wet green wings clicking to the mountain choir. Dewdrop, blackbird, twig snap, stonefall. And the wind playing on things carried the voices of the choir, patterning them to the tractor judder and the helicopter whir, and went off to stroke the water, leaving you listening with the choir as all cut through the very corpse and armor of the speech out of which the witless clicking and tapping of worlds beneath the clicking begins, shuffling and shoveling and making things up, no matter how many buckets you carry, how much muscle you give it as you garden. The way this western land wakes up, sometimes almost staggers to life again after the spring blizzards, can be haunting. In my own long poem, Ludlow, which details the massacre of immigrants in 1914 in southern Colorado, I tell a story from my childhood. You can find it toward the end of the book in a chapter called Stonewall Gap. And here's how it begins. Wind-blown aridity in early spring, pinyon, prickly pear, the struggling scrub. At noon my shadow pooled beneath my boots, my eyes surveying ground a step ahead for arrowheads or any signs of life. Out walking a friend's ranch with Abraham, the land a maze of dry arroyos, slabs of pale rock, the flints exposed by weather. There the terrible remains of winter, dead cattle caught in a raging blizzard, lay unthawed in postures of resignation. I was so intent on treasure that I stumbled into a ditch and fell across the corpse of a calf the wild coyote dined upon, a gutted, leathery thing that had a face, and I started backwards, stifling a scream. What was I? 12 years old? The age I dreamed Louisa Mole out foraging for water? On our visits south, I begged to be taken to the Mesa country, as if those afternoons on skeletal land put me in touch with some essential code, the remnants of a people who moved through, migrating hunters 5 millennia past. Look for a bench, land flat enough to camp on, a nearby source of water. There you'd find the silicates in flakes, clear fracture marks where fletchers made their tools, the midden washed by wind and flash floods all across the scarp. Nothing remained in place here. Even trees had shallow roots. In Dust Bowl days, my father picked up points by the dozen on this land, pot hunting like his neighbors, half in love with science, but more with the electric touch of hands across receded seas of time. What had we found? I knew this evidence of other lives had meaning of some sort. I saw the strangers, grew among them for years in my own mind. But was it love or envy? Was it only pride of place, a kind of theft? Always looking at the ground beneath my boots, always listening for the call of Abraham, who'd find a point and let me think I found it. whose meaty, sunburnt hands would leave the pool of wide-brimmed shade, point beyond scarred boots to the perfect knife, worked like a stone leaf, and left there by the ancient wanderers, original, aboriginal, and magic. Ludlow is a poem about this land and the way we tell our stories. And guess what? It's written in a form I stole from Shakespeare. We call it blank verse, the wonderfully supple and resonant pentameter line that has been so useful for poets over the years. But poems from the American West come in all sorts of forms. Here's our great friend, Art Goodtimes, who has done so much for the community of poets here on the Western Slope. A great voice, a godfather of the talking gourds, in his poem called Roadkill Coyote.
Roadkill coyote sprawls across the center line, back leg broken, round glazed eyes glassy as marbles, unwavering, unblinking as the world rolls by, now unnoticed or maybe all seen and thus merely unremarkable. No fudge or flinch of instinct, just the cold last look of it all. I turn the car around and go back to the body, drag her off the road. Steam rises when I stroke her flanks, the jaw locked open, canine teeth menacing even in death. I take out my knife, sing a death song, and thanking Coyote, I cut off her tail, fur too beautiful to bury, and then pull her hind end deeper into the rabbit brush, beside the highway's shoulder, all the way home, down the canyon and up Norwood Hill, singing her back into the mystery.
That mystery is the deep silence of the West we all know so well. The way the human voice stands still in the desert or is blown away by the wind. It's as deep as geology, as we can hear in Danny's poem, Trilobite Jesus.
Trilobite Jesus, he did not die for my sins, but from a sudden buildup of ash, a thickening weight. The newest level of the sea found him awash on a hardened beach, by a river, burrowed in, covered over, fast asleep in far Utah, sending out one last signal. The mud lithified about his lobe, all his work turned to stone. He lost hold of every belief. Trilobite Jesus, he didn't die for my sins, but he got it back. And I'm drilling a hole in his head with a carbide hammer drill bit to make of him a pendant to hang from round my neck, an albatross to mark this moment on the cross.
Even here, in this vast silence of time, we have our crucifixions, our human troubles. Kierstin Bridger can tell us a thing or two about these human troubles in her poem, Telluride Marshal.
It wasn't the way he spit when he passed, or trumped up charges of our vice. It wasn't the reprimands he imposed in jail, slaps and torn cloth, all the hot pots he wanted scrubbed, pokes he insisted for free. Not the cold water he dumped on our heads, or the way we scoured the cells on Sunday to serve our sentence sham. It wasn't his scowl or his contempt when our madam stood in the muck-furrowed thoroughfare in her faded wrap. She wasn't trying to make him a John. She wanted to attempt to converse in the light of day. Her old dog doing He's doing as all dogs do, his daily constitutional. It wasn't the way he shot her pug dead in the street. It was how he walked on, saying to his equally armed companion, "Those whores, I will not abide the lot of them." I remember her soft knees sunk in the mud as she reached to stroke her little pet.
It's a hard story, but the West is full of hard stories. As if the life here sometimes gets whittled down to bare bones. We spend so much of our lives watching animals, or we should. Our friend Wendy Videlock, a watcher and dweller in the deserts, intimate with Arizona and her present home here in Palisade, has a little poem called A Lizard in Spanish Valley.
A lizard doesn't make a sound. It has no song. It does not share my love affairs with flannel sheets, books and beads, interlocking silver rings, the moon, the sea, or ink. But sitting here the afternoon, I've come to believe we do share a love affair and a belief in wink, blink, stone, and heat. Also air. This is not a fable, nor is it bliss. Impatience, remember this.
We try to remember, and sometimes poetry helps us remember where we are and what we are. A part of the main, a part of all that we survey, breathe in, learn about, and touch. The great California poet Robinson Jeffers once wrote, "We must uncenter our minds from ourselves. We must unhumanize our views a little and become confident as the rock and ocean that we were made from." Jeffers also wrote about Colorado and New Mexico, but we remember him best from his poems written on the Carmel coast of California. In the theater of our imaginations, beautiful words can help us see. I love it when in a late poem, Jeffers imagines being eaten by one of the vultures circling above him in the sky. To be eaten by that beak and become part of him. To share those wings and those eyes. What a sublime end of one's body. What an ensconcement. What a life after death. It takes an imagination as wild as Shakespeare's to show us such things. Here's another poem, a late poem by Robinson Jeffers, "The Deer Lay Down Their Bones."
I followed the narrow cliffside trail halfway up to the mountain, above the deep river canyon. There was a little cataract across the path, flinging itself over tree roots and rocks, shaking the jeweled fern fronds, bright bubbling water pure from the mountain. But a bad smell came up. Wondering at it, I clambered down the steep stream, some 40 feet, and found in the midst of bush oak and laurel, hung like a bird's nest on the precipice brink, a small hidden clearing, grass and a shallow pool. But all about there were bones lying in the grass, clean bones and stinking bones, antlers and bones. I understood that the place was a refuge for wounded deer. There are so many hurt ones escape the hunters and limp away to die. Here they have water for the awful thirst and peace to die in. Dense green laurel and grim cliff to the dim end. No matter what magic of grass, water, and precipice, and pain of wounds makes death look dear. We have been given life and have used it. Not a great gift, perhaps, but in honesty, should use it all. Mine's empty since my love died. Empty? The flame-haired grandchild with great blue eyes, that look in her eyes? What can I do for the child? I gaze at her and wonder what sort of man in the fall of the world. I'm growing old. That's the trouble. My children and little grandchildren will find the way. Why should I wait 10 years yet, having lived 67, 10 years more or less, before I crawl out on a ledge of rock and die snapping like a wolf who has lost his mate? I'm bound by my own 30-year-old decision. Who drinks the wine should take the dregs. Even in the bitter lees and sediment, new discovery may lie. The deer in that beautiful place lay down their bones. I must wear mine.
It was another poet, not a Westerner, who told us that old men should be explorers, old women too. We live in a land that makes us think of ultimate things. We know how small a part of time we share. The great beauty of Jeffers' poetry is the way it puts us in our place and puts poetry in its place as well. Here's an early poem of his called To the Stonecutters. Stonecutters fighting time with marble. You four defeated challengers of oblivion, eat cynical earnings, knowing rock splits, records fall down, the square-limbed Roman letters scale in the thaws, wear in the rain. The poet, as well, builds his monument mockingly, for men will be blotted out. The blithe earth die, the brave sun die blind, his heart blackening. Yet stones have stood for 1,000 years, and pained thoughts found the honey of peace in old poems. It's the honey of peace we celebrate today, as well as the savor of salt. The great old poet, Anonymous, many of whose works predate Shakespeare, once sang a song that went something like this. O western wind, when will thou blow? The small rain down can rain. Christ, that my love were in my arms, and I in my bed again. There can hardly be a more profound feeling in the species we are. And the fact that we do not know who wrote that poem makes no difference at all, because the words are beautiful. That is a human voice speaking or singing to us from 500 years ago. It's a human voice crossing time. And that's what poetry is. Poetry is a voice. It is many voices crossing time, uniting us in the window and the mirror of art. The bard is with us, always with us. Maybe the greatest of all these voices. Here he is in Sonnet 111.
Oh, for my sake, do you with fortune chide, the guilty goddess of my harmful deeds, that did not better for my life provide than public means, which public manners breeds. Thence comes that my name receives a brand, and almost thence my nature is subdued to what it works in, like the dyer's hand. Pity me then, and wish I were renewed, whilst like a willing patient I will drink potions of Izal against my strong infection, no bitterness that I will bitter think, nor double penance to correct correction. Pity me then, dear friend, and I assure me, even then your pity is enough to cure me.
My nature is subdued for what it works in, like the dyer's hand. You can't intellectualize that. You can't teach it. It's work. It's practice. Just like practicing a musical instrument. We are, as the saying goes, all in the same boat. We're all human, all mortal, all capable of the same beauty and the same folly. Let us rejoice in this, our common life, on this spring day, whether or not it feels like spring, whether or not it feels like renewal. Let us climb like cicadas out of the earth and beat our wings together in raucous song. Let us be glad the bard came west, and other poets followed him in the word. And since nobody ends a play as well as Shakespeare does, let us attend to one of his very best endings, a song. I'm a shit singer, so here we go.
Come on, everybody.
Okay. When that I was a little tiny boy with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, a foolish thing was but a toy, for the rain it raineth every day. But when I came to man's estate with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, 'gainst knaves and thieves men shut their gate, for the rain it raineth every day. But when I came, alas, to wife with hey-ho, the wind and the rain, a swaggering could I never thrive, for the rain it raineth every day. But when I came unto my beds, with hey-ho, the wind and the rain, with tosspots still had drunken heads, for the rain it raineth every day. A great while ago the world begun, with hey-ho, the wind and the rain, but that's all one, our play is done, and we'll strive to please you every day.
Say where our glory most begins and ends, and say my glory was I had such friends.
Amen.
Thank you to everybody who came today. Again, I want to say we're going to be outside loitering if you're looking for books.
Loitering with intent.
Loitering with intent. And I'm going to leave you with just a few lines from John Donne. Go and catch a falling star. Get with child a mandrake root. Teach me where all past years are, and who cleft the devil's foot. Teach me to hear mermaids singing, and to keep off envy's stinging, and find what wind serves to advance an honest mind.